Greetings and welcome to the Mount Rushmore podcast. My name is Jeff, and I'm joined, as always, by my good friends Richard.
Hello.
And Michael.
Howdy.
Richard and Michael, they enjoy debating the Mount Rushmore of any given topic, and they are usually at odds with each other. But this episode, they are joining forces. They're going up against our guest, who is the voice of the Venganza Media conglomerate. This is an organization that's been around since 2005, putting out thousands of hours of entertainment to listeners with a whole fleet of contributors, a premier source for film reviews, celebrity interviews, and collecting news for audiences of all ages. They've got the podcast that you probably know about, not just books and nachos, Star Wars action news, Marvelicious toys, but the empire, the media titan. This is the Now Playing podcast that's been around for quite a long time. And our guest is the voice of said enterprise. Please welcome, to oppose our as rival, our host here on a topic that will soon be announced. Please welcome Brock. How you doing, Brock?
I'm very well. I'm very happy. What an incredible introduction. Thank you very much. I'm very happy to be here. I've listened to your show, and I have to tell you, I love the format. The idea of Mount Rushmore, of this or that, is a wonderful idea. And when I heard about this and you guys sent the invitation, I'm like, this is something I can get behind. So
hey,
congratulations
awesome
to you on your wonderful podcast.
Oh, thanks so much. So, this is going to go out. Listeners will be listening to this at the first possible moment this coming Thursday. Is there anything happening on the Now Playing podcast kind of in the moment that you would like to let people know about, that they can avail themselves of or join in or contribute to or support?
Well, I'm glad you asked. We got so much going on right now. So we have, of course, every week we have a free show for everyone on our feed at nowplayingpodcast.com, on iTunes and on Podbean, of course. And this week, and this past week, this is Thursday, right? So Tuesday we released Escape from LA, the Snake Plissken sequel. And this coming Tuesday on the feed will be Now Playing's 1,000th show. That is an amazing milestone for us.
Great.
Unbelievable. Yeah, it's unbelievable, but I'm not going to tell you what the title is. You're going to have to listen to find out. It's a special secret kind of thing, and I'm not going to tell you what it is, and I'm not going to tell you who's on the show.
Okay, it's an anti-plug. It's a promo without, it's a teaser. It's a teaser, yeah.
A bit of a teaser because it's 1,000 shows. It's a very special moment for us Now Playing. 1,000 shows for any podcast, as you guys know, is just a feat.
That's killer. Congratulations.
It's amazing. And in addition to Escape from LA, on tomorrow, Friday, we have our next live Now Playing summer movie series. We're just watching movies with our fans live over the internet, and that is going to be Blood Rage. We did Willy Wonka last time. We did Godzilla 98 the time before. Blood Rage, that's our next one, and that's going to be a lot of fun. In addition, we also have the Candyman series as our silver level donation going on right now. We have different donation series for people who want to support our show. We are completely fan-driven, fan-supported, So if you go to our nowplayingpodcast.com and you go to our subscriber support links, you can find out how you get special podcasts for your donations, and we greatly appreciate that. So Candyman is there, and I'll be on Sleepaway Camp for our Platinum series later in the summer.
Right on. Everybody go to nowplayingpodcast.com to support these guys. And also, while you're at it, go to their social sites. You can get into the dialogue with these guys by following them out on Facebook and out on Twitter. On Facebook, there.com, Now Playing Podcast. On Twitter, Now Playing Pod. They've got a YouTube. They've got all kinds of things. You can find that on their site. So we might as well jump into the topic. Pardon me?
Instagram, too.
Instagram. Awesome. So Now Playing Podcast has for many years specialized in reviewing and discussing and celebrating a series. Well, we're not that ambitious here on the Mount Rushmore podcast. We're going to bite off just a little bit less, but a little more than one film, and we're going to debate today the Mount Rushmore of Trilogies. Brock, please regale us and avail us with your first choice for the Mount Rushmore of Trilogies.
You know what, Now Playing, as you said, we do full series, so we watch every single episode of every series. So, for example, we started off doing that format with Friday the 13th. We watched all 12 movies, one episode at a time. Star Trek, Terminator, Marvel movies, you name it. We do it. That's how we do it over at Now Playing. And so when I was thinking about this, it occurred to me that my first pick is, honestly, our first two picks are probably going to be the same. Whether or not they're going to be in the same order, We will find out. But my guess is our first 2 picks will be exactly the same. And if I'm wrong, I'll tell you. I will cop to it. But my guess is our first 2 picks will be the same. Third is possible. Fourth, it's who knows. But I do think the first 2. And my first pick is one we haven't done on Now Playing because it's an underrepresented trilogy. And I think if we're doing the Mount Rushmore of trilogies, we have to go with the Naked Gun franchise.
Oh,
that is
cool.
the funniest franchise in the world, and I am completely kidding. If you go with a first head on Mount Rushmore being the Naked, I was going to say Legally Blonde, but the third one was video, and that's not even fair, you know?
Right.
But no, obviously, it can't be Naked Gun, although it's a fun pick. But a Mount Rushmore, I would have to go, of course, with the Star Wars trilogy. Now, the original Star Wars trilogy.
The saga,
the one that Kevin Smith, of course, called the Holy Trilogy in Mallrats and blah, blah, blah. The ultimate trilogy. Now, of course, yes, I am involved with Star Wars Action News. That is another podcast Venganza Media does, how I met Arnie and company to do Now Playing. And that is the first Star Wars Collectors podcast. So am I biased? Possibly, but here's the thing. Star Wars changed movies forever. Jaws was the first blockbuster. Star Wars was the first juggernaut. It changed pop culture. It changed movies. It changed special effects. It changed how people viewed viewed the movies and what it was for and how it was done. It did not make sequels up to that point were viewed upon as lesser than, right? You name a sequel before then, it was always considered bad. And then Empire Strikes Back comes along and blows the doors off the joint. So even with the third movie being weaker than The Empire Strikes Back and arguably the first movie, it's still a darn great movie. It's still a lot of fun, and it satisfyingly ends up the trilogy. One more thing I want to bring up on why I'm justifying Star Wars as my first pick, because if I have to. The Star Wars trilogy is a trilogy into itself. There are 2 other trilogies in Star Wars. We both know that. All 3 of us know that. But that first trilogy is, I think, the best formed. Even though the third movie, of course, if you've read the history on it, you know how it changed and the original plan changed, blah, blah, blah. But the way they ended it was very satisfying for most people. And it finishes Luke Skywalker's story great. His arc is complete in that movie. So when I think of trilogies, that is something that really means a lot to me in how the trilogy works together among itself. And I think Star Wars, the original Star Wars trilogy, does that better than practically any trilogy out there.
All right, well spoken, and it's a great way to kick it off, and that's a great approach, another angle then we've discussed the trilogy on this podcast. In nearly every podcast, we find some way to work it, and you could be talking wrestling or fondue or salad forks, and we worked Star Wars in.
Then Bib Fortuna comes off the top rope, and you're just like, okay, we got it.
Totally.
Michael and Richard, was the Star Wars trilogy or the Skywalker saga or the original saga in your choices?
I think in my head it was, and then I started connecting it to when I just started thinking of a set of 3 movies. I think I started putting it within a set of 6 movies and then a set of 9 movies, and then I started re-justifying it. Well, is this one specific thing? Because I started thinking about movies that have had trilogies and then they added a 4th one, or a movie that really kind of ruined themselves because they added more. And I'm not saying the prequel
Crystal Skull.
Crystal Skull.
Yes,
That's
exactly
Crystal
right.
Skull.
Yeah, Crystal Skull. Well, I mean that in person though, because if the more you say that name, the more it actually makes it real. So.
Yeah. But that's the thing. Like the idea of Indiana Jones not being a trilogy is fine for me because I personally don't care. But Star Wars has always been a part of something bigger, and it's, for me, they're like you said, there's these 3 individual trilogies within a bigger nonology. I don't even know what a 9 part would be called.
Nonology, yeah.
Nonology, thank you. But and I think you kind of alluded to it. George Lucas has kind of had like these just shifting views and a shifting history on how many parts the series was going to be and what his ideas have always changed. And I don't know. I think because of that, I think I eliminated being like, I don't know how many parts this thing actually is.
Oh, good. It's out of your question. Your questioning of how many Star Wars is there really were.
It's currently 9 movies in this one story, but it's also 11 movies, and it's also just 3 movies. Or sometimes I just watch Star Wars because it's just one particular movie.
Right.
And George Lucas always talked about Star Wars being like the last part, and then 2 other movies that were going to come before that one that told the history of the Clone Wars and whatever. And so it's like, whatever it is, whatever Star Wars is, it's this thing that is it's like this blob that is just changing constantly. And who knows what it's going to be like in 20 years, how many more trilogies there are, or is it going to end with 14 movies? And you're just going to be like, okay, Star Wars was a 14 movie thing. I just don't know. And for that, I kind of just initially eliminated. Also, Richard hates Star Wars, so like, we were never going to agree.
Hey, wait a second.
So, Brock, you were trying to interject. Was it regards?
Well, first of all, there's 12 movies because that terrible Clone Wars movies that came out. But like, who cares? So let me get this straight. Just let me get this straight here. You are eliminating the original Star Wars trilogy based on that self-contained trilogy is part of a bigger trilogy, part of a bigger saga, and therefore no longer a trilogy.
I think for me personally, and we literally, Richard and I didn't have this discussion. It was just like, there's too much to talk about as it just being a trilogy, because I don't know, maybe it's just the baggage. Maybe there's just like my entire lifetime of baggage with these 3 movies. And like, I don't know, I was thinking,
how many times did Star Wars hurt you, Michael?
Never.
Show us on the doll.
To be honest with you, in this day and age of reboots and sequels and blah, 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 very few trilogies are staying as trilogies. In fact, Naked Gun might actually make the list if that was true. But the fact of the matter is, even The Matrix is getting a 4th one. Right? So,
I know.
God forbid the 2 of you pick The Matrix for the Mount Rushmore of trilogies. And if you did, we could talk about that later.
All right, dudes, challenge. The gauntlet has been thrown.
Well, Richard, I've been talking for like infinity years. Would you like to start with one of our choices?
Yeah, sure. I'm going to go with our first choice. And I have this as a rare example of a trilogy where maybe even 3 movies weren't enough. And I'm talking about the Lord of the Rings trilogy.
Oh, right on.
I have a little bit of a personal reason for this. I'm currently reading through the Lord of the Rings books with my children. That's been their bedtime story at night. And as we're going through, and we just finished not too long ago reading the first book, and I was reminded about all of the different pieces and parts of the book that didn't make it into the movie. Not even stuff that was in the director's cut or the extended cut or all the various extra versions that have come out. Like Tom Bombadil is this amazing, great little character that is in the book for a fairly decent amount of time, and he's nowhere to be seen in the movies. I think that Peter Jackson had a Herculean task to try and figure out, how do you take this incredibly dense and plot-heavy story and be able to turn it into 1 movie per book? And I think, unlike The Hobbit, he made pretty much all of the right decisions with the Lord of the Rings trilogy. Forgetting maybe the fact that Return of the King, you probably could have cut about 20 minutes off at the end and been fine. Other than that, I think he made a lot of really smart choices with what he did include and what he didn't include. And I think, again, one of the issues with the trilogy is, why are we doing 3 of these? Why is 3 this sort of, 3 is the magic number, right? Why are we doing 3 of them? And I think in this case, this is an example of 3 was pretty much the exact perfect number. And if anything, it felt like it was, you could have had at least another movie out of it. And I'm sure, looking back on it, how much money these movies made, I'm sure the studios would have loved to have another one, which is why we wound up with the Hobbit trilogy.
Now, can I throw a flag on the play, or is that Jeff's job?
Oh yeah, lay it on us. No, you can play ref.
For 10 minutes of somebody saying, there's one trilogy, then another trilogy, then another trilogy. So Star Wars is disqualified because it's a gigantic thing. It's not really. You just said it in your own thing that there's a Hobbit trilogy because they basically wanted the money. And so what they did was they made not only one movie, but not only two movies, but three movies of The Hobbit. And they had some of the same actors come back and redo their parts from the first trilogy, therefore connecting the two trilogies. And therefore, everything you just said about Star Wars is negated by Lord of the Rings.
To be fair, that was everything that Michael said about Star Wars.
Yeah.
So
way to sell out your partner there. I would also.
This is why we're usually like arguing between the two of us. This is how I will tell you this about my son is 3 years old, just turned 3 within this whole COVID-19 crisis. Just yesterday, we watched the first hour of The Empire Strikes Back, which he's never seen, and it was the most beautiful thing that has ever happened in my life. Like, I thought watching Star Wars with him was great, but the anticipation for him watching a part of Empire, which he's only seen through images on like playing cards. Yeah. He was just like, that's an AT-AT. He's like, are the stormtroopers in there? I was like, yes. He's like, that's a Tauntaun. I was like, yes, it is the Tauntaun. He's never heard Yoda, and then he saw Yoda speak, and it was the most beautiful thing. I honestly, probably the reason why we didn't choose Star Wars is because we've mentioned Star Wars on every other podcast we've ever mentioned. It has been such a cultural. It is this thing that is embedded in my life and in every fiber of my being. That like at some point I just don't want to talk about it as important as it is. But in regards to like connecting the two Lord of the Rings trilogies, they're very. Even though they're made with some of the same actors or a lot of the same actors, they feel like so very different vehicles. Like I think that the Amazon Lord of the Rings series is going to feel so different from The Hobbit and Lord of the Rings. I remember seeing Lord of the Rings in the theaters for the first time, just the first one, The Fellowship of the Ring, and I hadn't read the books. And I remember getting to the end of it and being like, they didn't even confront Sauron. Like I need to know what's going on next. Like because I hadn't read it, I had this like such a visceral like, they got to the end, they really fight the bad guy. They fight some weird gargoyle looking dudes that are running down a hill.
Brock, were you going to say you got to introduce Star Wars to a younger relative?
Don't worry about it. I thought he was done talking, so I was going to interject that I had a very similar thing. My son was obsessed with TIE Fighter Pilot. And so when we actually had a bobblehead of TIE Fighter Pilot, so when he was like 4 or 5, instead of showing the kids the movies, what I did was I showed them scenes. I showed them the speeder bike chase. I showed them the asteroid field. I showed them so when those parts of the movie came up or we watched the movie from full, they would have that anticipating it coming. We learned that by playing Seen It, the game Seen It on the DVD, right? So like when we were watching The Incredibles, they were waiting for that scene with Dash running across the water, and that helped them get through the boring talky parts because, as we both know, although The Empire Strikes Back is wonderful, it does have a lot of talking scenes for a 5-year-old kid. So when we're watching the asteroid scene or whatever, the TIE Fighter pilots or the trench run, there's TIE Fighter pilot. It was the coolest thing, so I know exactly what Mike is talking.
This was Richard's choice. We kind of go back and forth on what we want to do, but when he suggested this, it was like, yeah, they really did the best part of adapting 3 books into 3 movies, even though it's all kind of mixed up.
Yeah, and sticking Christopher Lee in both of the Star Wars saga and the Lord of the Rings as a
if we can, that brings me up to a point that I really wanted to get into, was if we could add a 3rd movie to a series of films that only has 2. Get a reanimated Christopher Lee into Gremlins 3. Because they've only had 2 of them.
Hot take.
There's only 2 Gremlins. That would have benefited by Gremlins 3 for sure.
Let me tell you all what you're going to get when you go to Now Playing Podcast. I listened to the Escape from New York episode, and in addition to getting a summary of the movie, you get guys talking about this series of films and where a film falls in that series, what the world was like then, what was going on then Kurt Russell, as we know as Snake Plissken, was a Disney kid to many viewers when they first heard that he was going to be in this Escape from New York. So it's real fun to hear these guys chatter about it. The only thing I was disappointed in is I listened to the just recently dropped Escape from LA podcast, and I was disappointed that it wasn't an instruction manual, because Richard, Michael, and I live in Los Angeles right now, and it is a hellscape. It's a hot, sweaty, protest-ridden hellscape. So this gave us zero instructions.
That's a good bonus tip. Maybe we can do that for the special edition of the Escape from LA podcast.
Yeah.
Patron exclusive. How to get out of LA.
How to get out of LA. Yeah. Get on the 101. Okay. So, gentlemen, we've each started off with our first choices, and we'll speed things up a little bit on the ensuing ones. It's my fault. I'm dragging it out. So, Brock, what is your second choice of the Mount Rushmore of Trilogies?
This will help speed it up a little bit. My second choice is Lord of the Rings. So,
there we go. After you ripped into me making that pick, yeah,
justifiably, because you just went against your own logic. But it's okay. My logic is, and very similar to yours. Lord of the Rings, the movie trilogy, had the advantage of not only being based on a trilogy of books, but filmed all at once, right? Whereas Star Wars did not have that advantage. Pirates of the Caribbean did not have that advantage. Back to the Future did not have that advantage. It was not conceived as a trilogy. It was conceived as a single movie and then go on from there. Even though George Lucas says he had a big story in time, he had to make one movie first, right? But Lord of the Rings went into it knowing they're going to make 3 movies, even though I didn't hear about that 2 thing before. I always thought they're going to make 3. So I also did not read the books until seeing the movie. So I read the first book, saw the first movie. So read the second book, saw the second movie, did not read the third book because, as Mike said, I wanted to be surprised. I wanted to know what happens, but I wanted to enjoy it on the screen. And I was that guy on the ride home, way before internet memes were a thing, complaining to my now brothers-in-laws who are huge Lord of the Rings fans. Wait a minute. These giant birds were an option this entire time?
Right, yeah.
It really pissed me off. Because the last thing these movies needed to be or have was extended editions. I don't understand why we're watching them longer. I am not a huge Lord of the Rings movie fan. I've seen these movies in full twice each. I rewatched them a couple of years ago, and but I cannot deny how this definitely belongs in the Mount Rushmore of film trilogies. It was conceived. It was executed flawlessly. They took the subject matter seriously. The acting, the directing, the cinematography, the visual effects. Except for that third movie, they had a couple of dodgy things. And that third one was like the Legolas doing that Fred Flintstone down the trunk of the elephant thing. And I'm not a big fan of Ents. I don't like walking and talking trees, especially if they sound like Gimli. Calling it out. So look, Lord of the Rings. Also, am I wrong? I'm not wrong, because not only do audiences love these movies, but critics love these movies. And even though Star Wars is my first choice, some critics don't like Star Wars. And Lord of the Rings, Return of the King, not only won 11 Academy Awards, it was nominated for 11 Academy Awards. It won I think it was 17 total for the whole series. And like Star Wars, Ian McKellen was the only acting nomination, and actors didn't win. It wasn't about the acting, but it was about the acting. Can you imagine anyone else doing these roles besides Elijah Wood? Besides, for goodness sake, Sean Astin came out of left field and kicked it out of the park, man.
Yeah.
Sam. I mean, It's amazing. So this is an absolutely amazing trilogy of movies, even though it's something I don't return to very much. It's undeniable that if you're talking about film trilogies, you have got to accept The Lord of the Rings as one of the ones on the Mount Rushmore of film trilogies.
Agreed, totally agreed. Compassionate arguments for LOTR from both sides of the playing field here. So why don't we go on to Richard and Michael's second choice?
So our second choice, as you mentioned it just in your in what you said, Brock, was Back to the Future, which is one of those films that started out as a singular perfect film. Like, from start to finish, the first Back to the Future is so well done. And then they realized we can expand on this. You know, when it first came out, it didn't have the to be continued sort of Chiron added at the end. I think that was added on in like the VHS copies. once you started renting it in like 1986 after it came out, they decided, oh, we can do a lot more with this time travel thing. And what I like about the Back to the Future trilogy is they're all so different. Like they have the same concepts, but they're all vastly different. The first one is, a 1950s period piece. The second one is this mix of modern day sci-fi, reshuffling the board, going back to the 50s, going back to current 80s. Like there's so much going on in that when they're imagining what the future is going to be just 30 years ahead of time, and then having to deal with all of the repercussions in spite of all the dodgy time travelingness of it. Like it stops making sense when Biff initially comes back from giving the
almanac
to, like, he comes back to the current
future.
What was the present future, even though everything should have been changed like the movie falls apart in terms of like space-time continuum and all that. But then you get to the third film and it's this Western. And like, who could have imagined that they would have done all this like, it's so wild. And I love that. What was interesting is from the first movie, it was a complete story. The second movie, they started thinking, okay, we're writing 2 movies. So they have to lay all this foundation. They have to build all this stuff into this movie to pay off in the third movie. So a lot of like the Marty McFly being called Chicken has to be paid off, has to be called out and set up in movie number 2. It doesn't happen in the first movie. A lot of these little things, they just start laying these little Easter eggs and callbacks and whatnot in the second movie to set up the third movie. And I think you'll see that, I know on one of my choices, it kind of happens more and more, or companies and production houses and filmmakers start being more conscious of what's going to happen in the future. I mean, it's back, pardon the pun, but like they literally start thinking, what do we have to do in movie number 2 that's going to set up in movie number 3 and maybe movie number 4? I mean, who knows what's going to happen in this next series, this next Matrix movie, or these fucking Avatar movies that are going to go for 5 movies. I literally don't need to see another Avatar movie, but I kind of want to see it. I don't know why. I don't know why, but I kind of want to see it.
In the theater, though. I can't imagine why anyone wants to watch Avatar at home anyway. Yeah.
The Disney streaming has been like trying to push Avatar on me for the last 9 months and been like, I'm not watching you. I'm sorry. But like Back to the Future, they did such a good job of like understanding at some point that they were going to create a trilogy. And then, they finally got to that end point. And even at the end of the third movie, they're like, the guy can kind of travel through time. So maybe you're going to jump on Doc Brown's locomotive and fly off into the future or the past or whatever. Right. But I don't know. I think when you're thinking of trilogies, and they did a really good job of the kind of sowing the seeds and paying off the stuff you'd seen. And I think that's hard to do at the same time creating 3 very different movies with the same sort of theme.
I very much enjoy Back to the Future. I was the fan on that podcast series. We did that back in 2010 on Now Playing. You can find it in the archive section. Plug. And in that trilogy, I was the fan. I'm a huge fan. I've watched these movies dozens and dozens of times, unlike Lord of the Rings, of which I put on my Mount Rushmore, and I've only watched it twice. But I watched Back to the Future time and time again. I love all the connections you're talking about. For example, in Back to the Future 3, you'll notice when they're looking at the train for the first time, Doc and Marty, you can see Clara with her back on the train platform, back to them in the background. I didn't notice that until like my 10th time watching this movie. Those are so much fun movies. The reason it's not on my Mount Rushmore podcast are all the reason of Mount Rushmore of film trilogies, even though I'm a huge fan of it, is even as the fan I'm now playing, I could not recommend film number 2 for all the reasons you already pointed out. The movie basically exists to set up number 3. Number 3 is a fantastically fun, great movie.
Interesting.
Number 2 is what an amazing opportunity they had, and I love that they did it. You can go back into the first movie and show it from a different angle. How many movies have an opportunity to do that? It was fantastic. What a great idea. But that first part of the movie with the future. What you pointed out about Biff and that entire conceit, and then the very depressing 1985 alternate. And then once they get back to 1955, it's a lot of fun, but I think he took his wallet and all that shenanigans with him trying to reach it became slapstick. So for me, I have a lot of trouble with number 2 as a critic, as a now playing critic, but I love that trilogy. I enjoy it very much, but my complaints with number 2 kept it off my Mount Rushmore. And I had a feeling that might come up. I also want to call it out now, Jeff, that I was wrong. Our first 2 were not the same. But I am surprised. I'm very happy you picked Back to the Future, but it will not be on my Mount Rushmore.
Okay, all right.
I would like to change our number 2 to the Oh God series of films. Of course, Oh God Book 2, and Oh God, You Devil. So instead of Back to the Future, we're just going to go with George Burns.
The straight to video. What you talking about, God? Starring Gary Coleman.
Gary Coleman. Yeah.
While I plug the Mount Rushmore podcast, opportunity that listeners have to go out to our social handles and get in a dialogue with us, the hosts of the Mount Rushmore podcast. You can do that by going to Twitter, Instagram, or Facebook. Just Google Mount Rushmore podcast, and you'll find those social platforms. And give us your suggestion for a topic. Past listeners and suggestors have ended up being on the show as participants just because they went out and said, hey, you should do the Mount Rushmore of this or that. Alternately, you could get on there and let us know an opportunity missed. What was an example of a category that we chose that we just skimmed over and should have not been so dum-dum that we didn't think of it? You could also do us a huge solid, download, rate, and review past episodes, and that is the best way that other audience members can find it like you have. So we'd appreciate that. Now, I want to ask you to go out to nowplayingpodcast.com and just click on the site. It's feature rich. I mean, this thing has an archive of all the past episodes. It's got links to their other podcasts. It's got a forum where listeners can chat about the different episodes, the different series. It's even got a Cafe Press store. So go out and do that. And if you don't do that, go to Facebook, Now Playing Podcast, Twitter, Now Playing Pod, or Instagram. Is it Now Playing Pod, Instagram?
Now Playing Pod, yes.
Okay, cool. Okay, so we've gone through our halftime, and I've challenged these guys to formulate their review for the trilogy, the Bill and Ted trilogy, capped off by Bill and Ted Face the Music. Michael, I know you're a fan of the Wild Stallions and Bill and Ted. What is your review of this final movie?
I am so nervously excited for this, mostly because I have no idea when the next time I'll ever see a movie again in the theater is. But Bill and Ted's Bogus Journey is such a breath of fresh air in the same way that Gremlins 2 is such a breath of fresh air. Or yeah. It's one of those movies that it feels so different but has so much of the same connective tissue that I'm so excited to see what they're going to do with this third movie, especially now that Keanu Reeves is just like the darling of the media world again. Like, I don't know if he ever really fell out. Like, no one has ever disliked Keanu Reeves, but now he's like, oh my goodness, this guy he can do everything. He's
reached Dave Grohl levels of ubiquity.
He really has. Yeah, he is the Dave Grohl
peak coolness. Yeah,
peak cool, and just like he does amazing action movies and has always done amazing action movies, and is like this weird comedy guy that does really, and he plays dumb really well. So I want to see who Ted is 25 years on. And I'm a little frightened that they're going to fuck it up because they're going to fuck up everything. But at the same time, like, I don't know, they got the same people back. So there's just, I think the nostalgia thing is there. I watched the trailer that came out last week, and it was just like, okay, I love the idea that they're like 40-something-year-old losers that still haven't gotten their shit together. And like, as a 42-year-old, I'm like, man, this might be my movie. Yeah. I don't know.
So, all right, what's your outlook on it, Brock?
I'm very excited about it, actually. Sometimes when they have reboots or they bring back old dormant franchises, you don't want that. But after Excellent Adventure still holds up. It's a really fun movie. And actually, we have Bill and Ted's Bogus Journey in the now playing book, Underrated Movies We Recommend, which is a book our team wrote. I didn't participate in that, but my other co-hosts did, and you can find it because it's an underrated movie that everyone should watch. I agree with Mike completely. It's really, really fun, and you can get that book. You can go to our now playing Patreon, blah, blah, blah. You can, no more plugs. The point is that I completely on board with that choice. It's great. I also am a huge fan of Gremlins 2, by the way. And of all the reboots in the world, why haven't they done a Gremlins 3 CGI Gremlins? What are they waiting for? I don't understand it. So anyway, maybe Bill.
Who's the one that goes out and fucks the sexy gremlin? I mean, come on. That is the trilogy. That is the number 3. Someone has gone out and repopulated the world because they've had too much sex with the sexy gremlin.
Maybe it's Donald Clamp. I don't know. But anyway, I'm very, very happy they're doing a third one. I think it's going to be a lot of fun, even if it's not as successful as the first 2. I think it's a great idea, and the way they're approaching it, I think Mike is dead on. They give us some place to go if these guys are still losers instead of already saving the world at 40. When are they going to save this world? I'm curious. So, yeah, definitely a great idea.
Okay, cool. Gentlemen, thank you so much for giving us your first 2 choices in the first half, and now I'm going to ask for 2 more. And Brock, you're going to lead off the second half with your third choice for the Mount Rushmore of Trilogies.
This might be a little off the reservation for you guys, but I'm not really sure. But this is a trilogy that, again, didn't start off as a trilogy. But for some reason, they were able to make quite amazingly the blueprint of what I think should be a movie trilogy out of a single movie. That if you're going to make a movie sequel and then a second sequel, where do you go? What do you explore? How do you take your characters and develop them and to places where they haven't gone before, but yet stay true to the central theme of the original movie and have a satisfying conclusion that will bring tears to your eyes? And even more remarkable about it is they did those with characters made of plastic. My pick for number 3 is Toy Story. Toy Story Trilogy.
Oh, wow.
Now, I understand there's a 4th movie, but that is completely out of the trilogy. My daughter at dinner said to me, but there are 4 movies. I'm like, yes, but there is the Andy years, because the first, second, and third movie are about Andy growing up. The theme of this is we are there for Andy when he grows up, and he is grown up, and he gives the toys away. Spoiler alert, he gives the toys away at the end of the third movie. And as a parent, we would cry reading the storybook at the end of that movie to our children, even though we know what's coming. They took Toy Story 2 was originally going to go to video. It was going to be a direct-to-video sequel, made by Disney. Not even Pixar's wasn't really involved. Pixar decided to take a look at it, saw it, said, no, we can't do that. They scrapped what they had, took a general idea, and they had a very limited time to get this movie out. And Toy Story 2, I loved more than Toy Story 1 for years. It's hysterically funny, but at the same time is heartbreaking with Jessie. And they added new characters that made sense to help Woody's character develop. They stayed true to Buzz Lightyear, thinking he was a toy, but bringing the second Buzz Lightyear in. The third movie, you just talked about this before, how Bill and Ted was a different kind of a movie from the first one. The third one is an escape from prison movie. All of a sudden, they break out of prison, and it's hysterical. But at the same time, they have that Ken and Barbie thing with brand new characters that make sense. You bring in characters that make sense. And they use all the characters they already had. They got rid of some of the dead weight, and they use the characters they have in great ways. They use Potato Head. They find a way to use Slinky. They find a way to use all these characters, maybe not as much as they did in the original movie, but everyone was there for a purpose, even though it still stayed true to Woody and Buzz. And at the end of that movie, when they're holding hands, ready to die, and they get saved, and then the ending with Andy, I think there's no better way to end a trilogy than a satisfying way that we can all associate. We all can feel for this guy giving away his toys. He's moving on. The toys are moving on. And we all have been there that, wouldn't we just like one more day with somebody that you love? It's amazing. I'm about to cry right now even talking about it. So the Toy Story trilogy took something that was really fun and inventive. Not to mention, of course, they pioneered computer animation, which is the animation world has never been the same since. And every single movie develops animation styles and challenges and hits it out of the park. So technically speaking, storytelling is unequaled, and the Toy Story trilogy has characters that have endured for 25 years and still going. So Toy Story definitely on my Mount Rushmore of film trilogies.
Yeah. Richard and Michael, do you support that choice? What do you think?
I actually have not seen Toy Story 4, and I think a big reason for that is because I think 3 is such a perfect ending to the trilogy and to the story that regardless of whether or not 4 may be a good movie on its own as a standalone movie or even as part of continuing the story, I don't need to know it. I feel
It's
like
great.
We got such a perfect ending with 3 that it just feels superfluous at this point.
Number 4, we literally watched it this morning. Felix was like, I want to watch Toy Story 4. So you do what the kid says on a Sunday morning. And you come to realize that these movies are all these middle-age crisis movies for Woody. This is all this person that is this character. It's not a Buzz movie. It's not a friendship movie. It's not a kids movie. It's this movie about this middle-aged cowboy who's learning about his past. He's learning about his potential future. In Toy Story 4, it's him learning and dealing with issues of fatherhood. Richard, you'd love it. Like the way that Woody deals with Forky, who is an incredible character. And his understanding of himself as a 42-year-old person, or is going to be 42. It's like, oh my God, these are these amazing self-evaluation movies of like, in the first movie, he's dealing with what it's like to be slightly older and the new younger person coming in and taking all of the chutzpah from himself. He's this hot rod Buzz Lightyear comes in and it's like, holy shit, this guy is cooler than me. He's newer. I'm going to be loved more. What happens next? The next movie is about, God, what happens when I could find something new, and who do I stay true to? And the third movie is about staying true to that person, that you're the only person that everyone else is ready to move on, but you're not ready. And like, these movies are perfectly written from stem to stern. Like, Pixar really laid the grounds with how they do all these other movies because of the first Toy Story. It is so perfectly done. It pulls all the right heartstrings, and every movie does that at some point.
I very much agree. But the role that Woody and all the other toys play as co-parents for this child Andy, and protecting him, nurturing him, influencing him, and then at the end of 3, as Brock eloquently stated, there's a moment where these parents get to have a moment of truth. Did the child that they parent ever appreciate what they did? Did he ever recognize that they were more than just inanimate material? And you see Andy have essentially a graduation ceremony for each of them when he passes them on to Bonnie, and it reveals he knows exactly who these toys are. Oh, he knows exactly that the role. It just, for me, brought tears to my eyes for this movie. I already thought 3 was superfluous because 2 was so amazing. But I will add, Richard, that as Michael eloquently stated, it's in a way about this parent kind of outliving his duties to his child, but now he can address his duties to himself, to go out and go on a journey and have a relationship and have some adventures and realize that he's more than just his role as a ringleader, parent, protector, all those things. So yeah, I that fourth movie, it's the movie I didn't know I needed, and it also, you know what? It's got Keanu, right?
There you go.
Dude, kaboom! Of course, it's going to be great.
Hey, Richard.
Yeah.
Mike and Jeff saw a different movie than I did. I enjoyed Toy Story 4. I thought it was good. I saw all the themes they did. But what I saw was I only got to see a Woody movie. I didn't get a chance to see all my other friends. And they had a lot of new characters, some of which were only there for comedic relief. The new characters did not add the weight. Forky was the only one that carried weight in that movie. Duke Kaboom, very funny, a lot of fun. The Ducky and Rabbit guy, Key and Peele were hysterical in this movie. But overall, it's the first time a Toy Story movie felt like a sequel and unnecessary. Where it is still a good movie. All the themes they talked about with Woody are great. Woody donates a kidney. It's remarkable.
Yeah.
That's very funny.
You have to, you should see it only because, but I think you are 100% correct. The trilogy ends where it needed to end. And the fact of what happens in this movie proves that I'm right, because this movie is not about the toys together. It's only about Woody. And they're right. Everything they're talking about is right, but it does not necessarily have to be. If this is the first movie of a next trilogy, that's great, but there's no evidence of that yet.
Well, both my kids saw Toy Story 4, and they said it kind of sucks. So I have to go with what they said.
Go with your kids.
All right.
I will add one I guess two last things on Toy Story. One, if you watch the Toy Story shorts that are on Disney Plus, they are delightful, especially expanding on the Toy Story universe in terms of bathtub toys and
Small Fry is hysterical.
Small Fry, which is
So
just
great.
the idea that they are able to take this idea of what toys are and then turn it into things that are so commonplace, like fast food toys and then bathtub toys on Portysaurus Rex. Is just like, oh, you don't consider what toys are until you realize who is playing with them and the concepts. Yeah.
Good. Yeah, I agree.
All right. So lay it on us, Richard and Michael. What is your third choice?
All right, so our third choice, I wanted to go with one that kind of shows that a trilogy doesn't necessarily have to follow one story for 3 movies. I think we oftentimes think of a trilogy as a story that's got a beginning, a middle, and an end, similar characters, or same characters kind of filtering through the movies, and that's not necessarily always the case. One example of something that I didn't choose would be the Dollars trilogy, Fistful of Dollars, For a Few Dollars More, and Good, the Bad, and the Ugly, where the only character who really has a through line through them is the Clint Eastwood character, the man with no name who actually has a name in each of the 3 movies. They just happen to be different. So that's kind of an example of one for me. The one that I chose to talk about is one that's near and dear to my heart. It is the 3 Flavours Cornetto trilogies.
Okay.
The movies directed by Edgar Wright, co-written by him and Simon Pegg, and also starring Simon Pegg and Nick Frost. So if you're not familiar with them, I'll just let you know real quick. They are Shaun of the Dead, they are Hot Fuzz, and they are At World's End. And they work as a trilogy for a variety of reasons. One of them is that they're not necessarily genre spoofs, but they're kind of attempts to play around in the world of different genres, whether it's horror movie or buddy action cop movie or apocalyptic movie. But they also have some themes that I think recur throughout the movies. Now, one is obviously the theme of friendship and male friendship and kind of the positive and negative aspects of both. And I think on top of that, it's all 3 movies kind of are a take on male toxic masculinity. Whether it's Sean trying to go to his girlfriend's because he has to be the one who's going to save her, or whether it's in Hot Fuzz, whether it's Nick Angel being sort of the so good at his job that he winds up getting fired, and Danny being the guy who thinks that he's just the coolest guy in the world because he shot people before, all that sort of thing. I think that there's a real undercurrent of that, and there's themes that that recur throughout these movies. And I got a chance to see all 3 of them back to back to back here at the Egyptian in Los Angeles, with Edgar Wright being interviewed by Rian Johnson before and after each movie.
Oh, that sounds great.
Which was an amazing night slash morning, because I didn't get out of there until about 3 a.m. But these were things that kind of came up, like how is this a trilogy and not just 3 movies that are loosely related? And I think there are themes throughout all 3 movies beyond just their genre movies that I think make it really interesting when you get a chance to watch all 3 of them kind of in a row and sort of see that. And obviously there's some gags that go through the movies, the jumping over the fence kind of comes back, and there's a few other nice callbacks in some of the later movies to earlier stuff. But overall, I think it's just a really good example of a trilogy that doesn't necessarily have to tell one story, but can tell themes within different stories.
That's a cool observation. Yeah, what maketh a trilogy, and sometimes those things that we take away emotionally or thematically are more impactful or engaging than the plot itself. And I imagine if you were to say on any given film, hey, there's another Rocky film. Oh, what's the plot? Oh, it's a Rocky. Come on.
Right.
It's the character. It's what do you think the plot is? He has a challenge, then he punches his way out. So, are you, Michael? Are you also a fan, or was this Richard's pick solely?
It was Richard's pick, but I loved this choice when he suggested it, just because, the only thing that the visual thing that connects them is the Cornetto ice cream wrapping, and by the end of The World's End, you see it kind of flap along the gate, the chain link fence, as it slowly drifts away as the world has descended into chaos. But the movies really are about just this friendship between Nick Frost and Simon Pegg, and they're such different types of friendships within each one. One is very dependent on the other. He can't, in the first one, he can't really rely on, or Simon Pegg can't rely on Nick Frost as, his roommate, and just this constantly high, loafer. In the second one, he's this guy that just admires, and the third one's this guy that just is so sick of this guy's bullshit. But ultimately, it's just there's this wonderful love between them, and the third movie, The World's End, is such a wild rewatch. It's one of those movies that you have to watch again and again and again and again and again, and you see it, and you see all the little things that they've done within that movie to set it up, to reference. It is so elegantly written, and then and then it's about aliens and robots invading from space, and you're just like, it's wild. It is a wild.
It's a ride.
It's fun.
It's a ride. It's almost like, it's like the Return of the Jedi of the movies, where just all this crazy stuff happens. Like when you first introduced into Return of the Jedi, and you see Jabba the Hutt and his cavalcade of
Muppets.
Ridiculous monsters. At the very beginning of the movie, you're like, what am I watching? And then you get to the end of it, and these little, the Ewoks are destroying the Empire. You're like, what is this? And this guy's shooting lightning. You don't know what's going on. And I think The World's End has that same sort of vibe, where it's crazy from the beginning. And then also that Perfect Sunday song.
Yeah.
It is the perfect song to have in that movie, and just a wonderful choice.
I think what you're getting.
I hate to pump up our own choices, but just like Richard,
aren't we
Jeff's
great?
kiss?
Michael,
Aren't we just wonderful?
We're the best. I think what you're getting at is this feeling of kind of like when you get to the third movie of a trilogy and it's going to be a trilogy, you're kind of unloading the guns a little bit.
Oh yeah.
Where it's just like every idea that you've got, let's get it all out there. Let's go wild with it.
I'm going to say something awful. I remember in 2001 when Robert Smith said that Blood Flowers was the end of a trilogy between Pornography and Disintegration for Cure albums, and then Blood Flowers came out, and I remember being like, no. I'm so disappointed that this is what you think is connected to these two other seminal pieces of gothic art rock. And I don't know, there's something that just calling something a trilogy doesn't necessarily work, but I think The World's End really did put the cap on those three films.
I would say that the Cornetto trilogy does emotionally with their characters and the common situations that they seem to find themselves in a way that the SNL or Vince Vaughn, Owen Wilson films seem to have done, in which they, informally, Vince Vaughn and Owen Wilson, or Vince Vaughn and Will Ferrell seem like they've all kind of been in the same movie over and over again. And if you just look at the poster and you see those characters together, you kind of go, yeah, it's essentially a sequel to the thing that was before. And I wonder if the Cornetto trilogy might be extended in the minds of UK viewers who saw 2 seasons of a show called Spaced, which I've never seen. Yeah. Would they see the Shaun of the Dead as kind of an extension of that series? I've never seen Spaced, so I don't know.
We actually watched, we were taken by surprise one night, my wife and I, we watched Shaun of the Dead and we're blown away. We're not usually sit down and watch zombie films, right? But that one we thought it was hysterical. And then we watched Hot Fuzz and we were like amazed. So after watching those 2, we went out and rented Spaced we got it from Netflix back when they sent discs. So we actually watched Spaced because of that and really greatly enjoyed it. It's really fun. It still holds up pretty well, especially the first couple of, I think it's 3 seasons. I could be wrong. But maybe it's only 2, but the first season is stronger, I thought, overall. The Cornetto trilogy is something that Now Playing has reviewed. We did review it as a trilogy for a lot of the reasons you guys talked about. So I can completely understand why many people consider that a trilogy. To me, I make it to akin towards one of my favorite movies of all time is Butch Cassidy and the Sundance Kid. And if you both probably know that, 3 of you probably already know that, they also made another movie called The Sting.
Oh, yeah.
When I say they, I mean Newman, Redford, and the director. Right? So in that mind, those 2 movies go together. They're not really, they're a duology. They didn't make a third one. They couldn't find a script for years. They just didn't make one. But the point is that that's what those 3 movies, even though they have the Cornetto link and all that kind of stuff, that's the kind of trilogy they are. I also want to echo something Richard said. I did not also pick the Man with No Name trilogy because those 3 movies are individual movies. He has 3 different names in all 3 movies, even though he's the same character, even though they go together. They're not really a cohesive trilogy. They're just in the same area, same genre. Those are more of a trilogy to me than the Cornetto trilogy is, even though my friends over at Now Playing believe exactly what you're saying. And I can't argue with anything you said. All 3 movies are extremely entertaining and completely worth the revisits. If you haven't seen them recently, go check them out. They're really funny.
All right, gentlemen, this is the last time around. Brock is going to avail us with his 4th choice of the Mount Rushmore trilogies.
This was really hard for me because the first 3 were so completely obvious. And I ran through trilogy after trilogy in my mind, and I could not figure out for me, was it going to be Back to the Future? Was it going to be the Dollars? Was it going to be the Bourne trilogy? That one came up, even though there's 5 movies in it. The first 3 are together. They are the trilogy, and there's afterthoughts, right? And the issue and why I'm not picking the Bourne, and maybe you guys are, and we can talk about it, but I'm actually curious about other ones you guys thought about as well. Maybe we can do that quickly after we have time, about other ones we didn't quite make the Mount Rushmore and why. But I went with something that was mentioned earlier only because I was overthinking this like crazy. And I was like, I'm looking for excuses not to pick this. So I'm going to have to go with it. But it's the Indiana Jones trilogy. And here is why. Crystal Skull, I've heard of it. It has a guy named Indiana Jones in it, but it's not an Indiana Jones movie. And the last movie ends them going off in the sunset. Now, the reason I was so on the fence about it was the first movie is absolutely amazing. The third movie is pretty much a sequel to the first movie. The second movie is a whole different thing with whole different characters, and Indiana Jones himself isn't the same exact guy. Now, of course, you could make the argument that it's a prequel and takes place before Raiders, and therefore he has a character arc. But there really is 3 movies in the serial feel with amazing set pieces, lots of fun of action, and these movies are so incredibly rewatchable. And Raiders of the Lost Ark is a movie that changed movie history, again, like Back to the Future did, like Toy Story did, like all the other choices we've talked about today, with the exception of the Cornetto trilogy. It didn't really change movies forever, but it certainly is a worthy inclusion, no doubt. So Indiana Jones is a trilogy that has endured the test of time, and the reason they made a 4th movie was so many people loved his first 3. And those 3 movies are some of the most beloved movies of all time. Now, arguably, I think Temple of Doom has aged the worst of all 3, and which is why, and Temple of Doom is the reason I was on the fence about even including this. But it's still a lot of fun, and it's a little darker than I would want. And it's not the Indiana Jones movie, that we all thought we wanted, but it certainly is full of adventure and fun. Now, full disclosure, I've read almost every single Indiana Jones novel that's ever come out. I am a big fan of Indiana Jones. I've watched those movies as close to as many times as I've watched Back to the Future and Star Wars. But I think if we're talking about a solid film trilogy, this one is right up there. And if it's only 4, right? So if we're doing a top 10, I can't imagine this wouldn't be in everyone's top 10. But for me, it's in my top 4. Last face on the Mount Rushmore is that of Henry Jones Jr.
That's awesome. All right, yeah, that's. I thought those were going to be your first 2, actually, Brock.
Yeah.
There was something I was vibing off of. Maybe it was just kind of a whole Lucas. Thing. Oh yeah.
Yeah.
I got to rewatch. It's funny. I think of Temple of Doom as Spielberg's divorce film and darkness of it. And
Lucas too. Lucas was going through a divorce with Marcia right before that too.
Was he really?
His wife edited the first Star Wars movie, and then he also got rid of Gary Kurtz, which is why Return of the Jedi is more like the prequels than it is the other 2, because he also got divorced from his producer Gary Kurtz.
Wow, it's a double divorce. Yeah, but then you look back at, I just rewatched Indiana Jones, and there's some let's just say there's some character aspects of Henry Jones that have not stood the test of the Me Too movement, or there's certain things about the relationships that he chose to have, and things that I don't damage the film, but they do kind of reveal the character growth that he needs to have. Yeah. Gentlemen, I know you're fans of the Indiana Jones films. What do you think about this choice?
I love Indiana Jones. I even enjoyed so many aspects of Crystal Skull. Not that we're talking about it within this trilogy. Really, the movie just Crystal Skull for me kind of took a nosedive when
Shia walks on the screen.
Mutt started swinging along the vines with the other monkeys in the jungles of South America, and at that point I was like, I love the idea that the next installment was a sci-fi movie and they dealt with aliens, because that felt very 1950s, to be honest. Like sci-fi, aliens, the future, what's going on. But the first 3 Indiana Jones movies, the original trilogy before they added on, the 4th stepchild, were just so wonderful. The father and son relationship was so well done in The Last Crusade, and it was something that you didn't realize that you were missing. That this guy that was like, he was so well put together, he was so confident, he was so imbued with his own self-confidence, and then he's just so struck down just being around his dad. Yeah, and he can't live up to it. He's cowed. He's suddenly this guy that is punching Nazis and jumping off the submarines and destroying the Ark. Is just mewed in front of this dad, is just telling him to stand up straight. And he's just like, it's such an interesting character aspect that really fleshes him out as like, oh, he's a real living person that isn't just this bravado. This, he's already unbelievable as incredibly handsome, this adventurer who's tracking down all these lost artifacts, who's also like as a brilliant school teacher. But then, this 4th aspect of like, he's got a shitty relationship with his dad and has for like 35 years. Yeah.
I can't even imagine better casting. Too good. Yeah. Who's Indiana Jones's dad? James Bond. That's who he is.
Yeah. Completely.
Duh. Who's going to think it's going to be Walter Matthau? What?
I would pay to see that, actually, but yeah.
Junior. Okay. Cool. Richard and Michael, I won't say that you're way the F behind, but you're behind right now. So this last choice is going to have to be pretty awesome.
Yeah, I hate to tickle your balls, but obviously we're going to choose Batman.
Oh my God! Okay.
The Dark Knight trilogy.
Oh, okay. All right.
It's not Batman 66, and I assume Batman 67 and Batman 68, which would have been incredible films as well.
I was going to say the Batman Forever one. I'm like, I want to hear this. Okay, go on.
No, the Christopher Nolan Dark Knight films are just so well done. I think what there is so good about them is they are really good individual movies, but then they also tell a full story between all 3 of them. They tell the story of, Bruce Wayne, who from the get-go almost wants to give up being Batman. He's looking for something else to get he's looking to get out of being Batman, even though he feels compelled to be Batman. And I think that is an aspect of the character of Batman that really hasn't been talked about. He is this guy that is so driven to pursue the end of criminality and the protection of his city and his revenge. But I thought the interesting aspect was, I think they introduced it in the second film, was like, someone else has to do this. I can't do this forever. So he sees Harvey Dent as this person that is going to, help fight crime. And then he realizes that he's flawed. And then eventually the Robin character, the quasi-Robin, the quasi-new Batman character is introduced in the third film. And it's like, oh, here's someone that can take on this mantle and I can stop. Batman wanting to stop, I think, is such an interesting, Batman wanting to rest, I think, is an interesting angle. But, The Dark Knight, the second film, is just so perfect. The casting is so perfect. The fighting and the way that they handled Joker was so perfect. Bane, I thought, was so interesting, even though he was so hard to understand. I think that was the real trouble, was just the choice that he made as an actor and the way that he delivered the dialogue.
You don't think a film can support two mumbling action protagonists? Two unintelligible characters?
They handled a very, Batman has always dealt with like these strange, supernatural, not otherworldly, but just, very hard to believe characters. And I think that they really brought them down to a real world aesthetic for all of them, whether it was the Joker or Bane or even Catwoman in the third one, or Scarecrow, who just kind of this guy in a mask, in a really shitty mask. It wasn't too elaborate. It was just shitty enough to be like, oh yeah, this guy made it himself.
I think Nolan succeeded in bringing Batman back to his origins in a way that was something the audience didn't even know, might not even know, that the origins of Batman was a detective, was not. So Batman kind of went on this arc to being in the 60s, or Batman as depicted in films. There were two serials. Then there's the television show, which kind of had a swinging, sexy Carnaby Street, almost Austin Powers type Batman. And then in the Tim Burton Electric Kool-Aid Batman. No, but when Batman becomes Bond in Christopher Nolan's films, it's a really interesting diversion for that franchise, right? Because it was so Bond-like at times while still keeping the Dark Knight components.
Well, in the Dark Knight too, it does that thing that all sequels have, is that immediately the character is plucked out of their hometown and thrust into an international situation. It happened in the Dark Knight. He goes to Beijing and has to track down the criminal. And most importantly, it happens in Muppets Take Manhattan when they suddenly go overseas and
you mean Great Muppet?
I'm sorry, the Great Muppet Caper. Thank you, Richard. When they have to, solve the riddle of the baseball diamond. Fabulous. Another trilogy we should have talked about, Richard.
Yeah,
I can't believe I didn't think of that.
I thought of it, and I chose not to choose that one. Although I did very much enjoy your episode on the best Muppet human character cameos. Okay. I think your Dark Knight this did come up in my mind as well. It's this very solid trilogy. The third movie is a steep step down from the second one. I've noticed most of what you're talking about is the second movie, and why this trilogy stands out. I've watched these first two Batman movies more times than I can count. The third one I've watched once. And it's basically, the plot is Rocky 3. I mean, I know Chris Rock pointed that out right after I wrote it about my review on Letterboxd. If you want to check out Letterboxd, I wrote my review the weekend of, and then Monday, Chris Rock said the same thing. It's really there. Alfred's ending feels false to me, although Bruce Wayne's feels true. Everything you're saying about how he wants to be he wasn't Batman for 8 years. So then he had to come back, and he was undertrained, blah, blah, blah. There's a lot of great themes there. There's a lot of great things for him to do, but that one really felt like a huge step down, which which would bring me to. So I congratulate you on your pick. I can't really argue with it. It's a really good trilogy, but that third movie is such a step down from the second one. It's hard for me to want to consider it, much like the Godfather trilogy.
Yeah.
The first two movies.
Yeah. Good point.
Exactly the same thing,
Good point.
right? All of us did not pick the Godfather trilogy. The first two Godfather movies won Best Picture. The first two Godfather movies, people argue which one is better. The first two Godfather movies I've watched more times than I can possibly count, and I want to watch them again right now. That's how good they are. And that third one I've watched twice. Once when I saw it the first time, and the second time when I got the DVD and I watched it with the commentary to see how Coppola kind of justified all this stupid choices. So it to me, the Dark Knight Rises is a better movie than Godfather 3, even though Godfather 3 is not as bad as they say. But to compare it to the other two, the Dark Knight Rises doesn't rise to the top for me, which is why I didn't pick the Dark Knight.
I think it's so hard just to end anything. Anytime you're coming up with whatever is the end, it's so hard to do. It's always not easy, but putting a character in peril and amping up the stakes is, okay, it's easy to put pressure. It's hard to find something that is such a satisfying resolution. I think going back to Star Wars, that's why the end of Return of the Jedi is so satisfying, because Darth Vader fucking picks up the Emperor and tosses him over, and then he says, "Tell your sister you were right." And it's just this huge catharsis. And then, of course, the Yub Nub song. But
everything you're saying right now is why I picked my four choices.
Yeah.
All four of my four choices, the third movie stuck the landing. And
I gotcha.
That's huge for me, because when I told you, I thought about this way too much for my fourth pick. What movie sticks the landing? And even though and he rides off into the sunset with his father, his best friend, and for some reason, Denholm Elliott. So they're going off into the sunset, and that is a great ending to this man's story. And all the other picks have already talked about how they stuck the landing. Whereas Dark Knight Rises, the ending is satisfying, but to get there for that 200 for the 2 hours and 45 minutes to get to that satisfying ending, a lot of it was rough. But it was a more satisfying ending than that movie led me to believe while watching the first 90 minutes and 2 hours of that movie.
Funny about Dark Knight, the Nolan Batman trilogy, is out in the meme-verse. You don't see Christian Bale. You see Heath Ledger. He is one of the more enduring aspects of that film, at least in the fabric of visual, internet-y, social media stuff. So some of your discussion is about Bruce Wayne's journey and his evolution throughout the films. And I think when we're judging what a good trilogy is, Brock had kind of mentioned, does it stick the landing? And then in the middle piece, is it just set up for the third film? And in one of the films, Back to the Future, I believe too, you said one of your perceived flaws was that the second film is just kind of moving people in. It's like a pool player trying to set up all these shots for their next turn, and he's not sinking anything. So that's, I think, a compelling description of how 3-act storytelling and how it exists in the macro and the micro in trilogies, and whether it's satisfactory. Does it stick the landing at the end and reward the viewer? Michael said endings are tough, and I couldn't agree more, because it's my job to end this thing. But in a way that's satisfactory to the people who've been on this 90-minute journey with us. And we appreciate Brock from the Now Playing podcast for going on this journey with us and coming at it with so many good choices. And we appreciate it so much that he's going to win by a landslide. And it's not just because we value his time and want to make it worth it with the big trophy, the golden trophy that will be shipped to his address, P.O. Box, or whatever you sent to us.
Sure.
We're gonna fax it over to you.
We'll fax it, yeah. Oh, you don't have a fax? Ah, no trophy.
Hey, you're fired! Back to the Future 2 reference. Go on, please.
Yeah.
Some points will be handed to Michael and Richard, because they also chose Lord of the Rings trilogy. So Lord of the Rings trilogy is going up on the Mount Rushmore of trilogies, and so they will be ascribed some points for choosing that. But from that point on, Brock gets the rest, the Star Wars trilogy, and I love the argument about how that changed film forever, not only from a technological standpoint, but from a kind of a marketing and all the things that surround it. And then I loved your arguments surrounding the Toy Story trilogy. And I do appreciate how you really embraced the make it your own approach to this topic by choosing your trilogy out of 4 movies, the first 3, which you also did with the Indiana Jones trilogy, which is going out on the Mount Rushmore. So Brock has the winning choices: Star Wars, Lord of the Rings, Toy Story, and Indiana Jones trilogy. So a big collective woohoo for Brock from the Now Playing podcast. Brock, before we depart our listeners' ears, what is Venganza Media? Did I say that good?
Yeah, it's the overall company that encompasses all of the Venganza Media podcasts, which include Now Playing Podcast, the Star Wars Action News, the first and best Star Wars collectors podcast. It's all about collecting Star Wars toys, statues, books, etc. We also have Marvelicious Toys, which you mentioned earlier also in the podcast, which is all about collecting Marvel toys and Marvel statues and Marvel collectibles. And Books and Nachos, which is our book review podcast, often linked to the movies we're watching. For example, we did James Bond many years ago when Skyfall came out. We did all 25 of the movies at the time. And we've gone back, of course, and did Spectre. But we read the original Ian Fleming novels back then, was Books and Nachos. And Arnie is reading all the Stephen King novels as they do their Stephen King retrospective, for example. So
Nice.
it ties in. It's really kind of fun to do it that way. And go to now Books and Nachos is spelled out booksandnachos.com for the book reviews there. I do book reviews of Star Wars on Star Wars Action News. That's one of my main gigs, and I've been doing that since 2007 over there. So that's Venganza Media is the corporation that encompasses all of that. And you can go to Venganza Media Gazette, which is the overall kind of like a blog of our podcasts. There, of course, all of our podcasts have individual sites and individual feeds on iTunes and wherever you get your podcasts. So thank you for asking, but that's what Venganza Media is.
Oh, cool.
Founded by Arnie and Marjorie Carvalho. I should mention them because they are the producers and founders of all of these podcasts, and without them, we would not exist. So thank you to Arnie and Marjorie. And Arnie Carvalho is the brains behind most of what we do, and Marjorie is probably the brains. They're both the brains behind Venganza Media. I don't really know who has more brains in there, but there's a lot to make these shows go. So I almost put my foot in my mouth there, but there you go.
We thank the Carvalhos and thank you guys for being some of the first people in this space, in the podcast space. So that's really cool. And I want to congratulate you guys on 1,000 episodes. That's pretty amazing. We thought we were the silverback gorillas for having 250 or whatever we have. So that's pretty outstanding. Gentlemen, thank you so much for hanging out with us. This has been the Mount Rushmore podcast discussing the Mount Rushmore of Trilogies. I, as always, am Jeff.
I'm Richard.
And Michael.